Hi guys, welcome back to the Campbell Academy podcast, Nothing But the Tooth, with me, Colin Campbell. This is the podcast that explores atypical pathways to success for people that we admire and look up to, and I hope that you really enjoy this episode. Today I'm going to be interviewing Sara Symington.
Well, it was the start of being discovered is probably how I'd phrase it. There was a little bit of a blip before being discovered, and I think it was a combination of I was in full-time work, doing full-time shift work. I was training myself. I didn't have a coach. I was battering myself, being brutally honest with you, and I didn't have enough recovery. I ended up with overtraining syndrome or chronic fatigue, for want of a better word. It took quite a while, I suppose, in some ways, to have it sort of diagnosed and something named. Oh, this is what I was, I suppose, experiencing.
I'm allowed to say that I first met her in a sort of professional capacity when she was looking for some help, and I was a little bit starstruck and taken aback because the individual that I'm going to introduce to you is a two-time Olympic cyclist from both the Sydney Olympics and the Olympics in Athens. And so she was in the middle of British cycling when it just started to kick off and really, really make things happen. And she also was perhaps instrumental in some of that, as you'll find out in the podcast itself. She subsequently, though, has gone on to achieve amazing things in sports management and performance directorship. Most notably, I suppose, being the performance director for the Roses, the England netball team who won gold at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in Australia. She's had many different jobs in performance sports management, but she is currently the Olympic performance director for Olympic and Paralympic results for British cycling. She is an incredibly gifted and successful individual who is extraordinarily humble, and I was really keen when we were doing these new versions of the podcast to get her on as one of the early guests because she has such an extraordinary story to tell, and so I really hope you enjoy listening. So hello everybody, so we are episode 4, Nancy's telling me, right, episode 4, and today I'm going to be speaking to Sara Symington, which is a huge pleasure stroke privilege to speak to Sara. So I've asked Sara before she came on here whether it was okay to talk about anything. She said yes. So at the risk of having to wipe this out, so we've known each other in a professional capacity because I met you in Loughborough and about 2010. Yeah?
Yeah, I think it was.
2010. And because I went down to help somebody in a practice there and we met there. And so I was kind of quite starstruck at the meeting you over that because I've met you for like a couple of appointments things. And so meeting somebody famous who'd operated at such a high level of sport. And at that stage, you were working up to work in the London 2012 Olympics, which we'll come back to in a little while. And then just connected back again sort of professionally and stuff after that, after the period had passed. And then we started to ask you to do some bits and bobs, didn't we? And you've just helped us out by doing some inspirational chit chat about stuff. And you've just like gone from level to level to level through the years. It's been amazing to watch. So we're still just dead grateful that you come and chat to us. So hello, welcome.
Hello, and look, thanks for inviting me.
So what we do here in this, we're trying to explore people's backgrounds as to how they get to a position of inspiration of other people, right? So atypical pathways usually, but what makes inspirational people tick, how they got to where they went, to try and give people hints and tips to brighten up their otherwise dull lives and make them a little bit better and like themselves a bit more. So there's only one bit of research here because I have to get my phone out to just read this bit. So I'll start by asking you to tell me about Maracaibo. Is that how I pronounce it?
That is how you pronounce it. Yeah.
So tell me about Maracaibo. Where is it?
In Venezuela. In South
northwest
America.
Venezuela.
I, more than I knew. And that's where I was born.
How long did you live there?
3 years.
Do you know what it's famous for?
No.
No. All right, good.
Coffee?
See, I've done my internet
Coffee?
research. No, oil, actually.
Oil,
but it also lightning. So the lake at Maracaibo apparently is one of the places where people go to lightning watch because they get such amazing lightning shows.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you're South American by birth.
I am.
So you could have represented Venezuela.
I could.
At cycling or triathlon.
I could. Or any other sport that I chose.
And so you moved back to UK when you were...
Yeah,
Right.
when we came back for about a year when I was 3 and my sister was 1.
Right.
And then kind of went and travelled various other countries, ranging from Dubai to Iran just before the revolution to Singapore.
Was that parents' work then?
Yeah, and now that you've asked me the question about Maracaibo and what it's known for, it kind of explains a lot.
Was your parents in oil?
Yeah.
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 And that's why they were in Iran?
Yeah.
Jeez, what age were you when you were in Iran?
Oh gosh, 8 years old.
Right, okay.
So yeah, that was quite an interesting year actually. We lived in a place called Ahwaz, which was 200 miles south of Tehran. Both of us went to American schools. But probably the memory that kind of really kicks in is about how, I suppose, when the Shah got overthrown, We ended up traveling back up to Tehran and living on my dad's office floor for a week, literally going to the airport every night to try and get a flight out of the country.
Blimey, that's incredible, eh?
Yeah.
So this is what I love about this, because the world we live in at the moment, we were chatting about this today. So we're talking about, should we listen to podcasts on ×3 speed so we can listen to more podcasts, right? And Jordan Peterson, who's this really clever dude, one of the cleverest guys in the world, allegedly watches The Simpsons at ×3 because he gets more episodes, but you lose the depth of anything if you look at things too quickly. So the stories you get from people when you actually take the time to speak to them, because I've spoken to you on quite a lot of occasions, but never knew that. And these are the things that kind of shape us, whatever age we are. At my wife and I, Alison was 5 months pregnant with my eldest when we were in 9/11. We were in LA.
Really?
And we were flying United Airlines that day to Vegas. And I remember like the phoning home and the trying to get through and all the carnage of that stuff. And so you've lived in lots of different places, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why you've got a broader view of the world.
Probably. And I think, look, I kind of don't take it for granted, and kind of in terms of what I've learnt about different cultures, has been an incredible experience.
What's the best place you've lived? Don't say Bunny in Nottinghamshire.
Nottinghamshire. Oh, I think it was Singapore.
Right.
I think it was probably, by then I was like literally getting into sport, I suppose, quite heavily. We went to an international school there, and the opportunities, if you were sporty, were incredible.
What did you start in? What was your first sport? Swimming?
Competitively. But yeah, I suppose I was brought up on water sports. My dad's a very keen sailor, so we were bought dinghies and we raced, and which then transitioned to windsurfing, which obviously led to swimming. You had to swim to be able to do those sports, or you needed to swim. And it just kind of like grew arms and legs, and then every place that I kind of either went to live or different schools, I kind of wanted to try them all, and I did.
That's like, because there's different schools of thoughts on this, aren't there? But one of the things is one of the schools of thoughts to produce the athlete in the end is to have this broad range, right? That creates strength and fitness and balance and all of that stuff, and engines and stuff.
100%. There's enough research now to kind of substantiate what you're describing there. And I think, if I look at my own history, but others that have been successful, highly successful, you often see a pattern of exactly that.
Yeah.
They've tried all sorts of different sports, been exposed to different skill sets, whether it's hand-eye coordination, running long distances, sprinting, whatever.
But I can totally transpose that into sort of my professional world, because we've had the conversations with people about that today, because I'm going to say specialist in inverted commas, not actually in inverted commas. I have the title like that, but there was this big jump trend over 2 decades to get everybody was micro specialising, and it's rubbish. Because when I see people, I see people in clinic and new patients a lot of the time, and they're not a single specialist problem.
Yeah.
You need a massive broad look at them, and it's the same as young people who I've seen that are good at sport, love sport, and are happy to try any aspect of sport, and they can do things like balance on one leg, and they can do a plank and stuff like that. Whereas, because I coach my son's, I'm a football coach by default, and I don't know anything about football. I never played it, but the guys, like you see this in where we live in West Bridgeford, it's like there's loads of guys that just like they batter their son or their daughter now to death to try and make them into the next Mbappe or Ronaldo or whatever, and they're being additionally coached on a Saturday when they're 7, and they're being this and that, when what they should be doing is riding their bike and swimming and running and playing golf and playing tennis, and
I'm making it fun.
Just enjoying it, because you can't kill yourself forever. Well, I don't know, they managed to do it with Andre Agassi and the Williams sisters, so I guess that's what they're trying to chase, though.
No, definitely. But I think there's synergies there too. I suppose if I look at my professional career as well, I'd say I'm not an expert in anything, brutally. But I've had such a broad range of experiences, but I ultimately know enough to be able to ask the right question at the right time of the experts.
So there's now a movement. There's a guy called David Epstein who's written a book in the last couple of years called Range.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's an eye-opening thing about the rebirth of the generalist, right? So generalists dictate what specialists do, don't they?
Yep, 100%.
And that's your work, and we'll get to that in a minute, right? So let's go back.
Hold on to that.
Because all the really interesting questions are still back in the past. So we live in Singapore. What age were you then?
Now you're testing me. Probably
early teens?
Yeah, early teens, 12, 13.
Okay, so at some point you came back to the UK.
Yep. Came back when I was 14 with my sister to go to our to a boarding school. Basically, my
Right.
my parents weren't quite sure where they were going next, and I was about to enter my O levels. That gives away my age. So they wanted a bit of
Yeah.
stability at that point from an
Where was
education.
the boarding school?
Warminster in Wiltshire.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
And was that good?
it was actually. It
Yeah.
was really
It's
good.
about Harry Potter.
Yeah, it was.
And so Stephen, I've read Stephen Fry's biographies, and his recollection of, despite the fact that he was abused, his recollection of school, of boarding school, was really positive. He really loved it. Right?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I mean, if you ask my sister, it might be a different
Right,
story.
okay. Is she older or younger?
She's younger.
Right.
Yeah.
What does she do?
She went into town and country planning.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, and sort of set up her own business. And
Was
did
she in
that.
sport?
She dabbled in sport, is probably how I'd phrase it. She's a keen sports person, but was never really as passionate or threw herself into it as much as I did.
And so when you came out of school and you went to university to do your business degree, yeah?
Sports science.
Sports science.
Initially.
You did do sports science, that's
Yeah.
right. And then, because you loved sport.
Yeah.
And that was the subject to do. And you did that, did you do that at Loughborough?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I went to Warwick University initially. I thought I wanted to be a teacher, but after a year, I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. So that's. I mean, I came to Loughborough and did a
So
sports
you
science degree.
changed after your first year of university.
Yeah.
So that's quite telling, isn't it, in the whole atypical pathway thing? Because the atypical pathway success story and usually involves people that say, and pardon my French, that they'd go, I'll try that thing, no, fuck that, I hate it, I'm doing something else, right? So there's a degree of disagreeability in that individual that changes tack.
Yeah.
And we had a chat in the kitchen, didn't we, about both of us not knowing what we wanted to do when we grew up. Yeah. Right?
Mm-hmm.
and
Still
that's
don't.
the atypical person does that. And
Yeah.
I find the people I talk to, like episode 3 of last one, Gurmit, is this you for life? No, absolutely, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I'll go somewhere else, I'll do this, I'll do that, because it's about the adventure.
Yeah.
And they tend to be detached also, not entirely a lot of the time, but detached from the necessity to earn as much money as possible, because that's not generally the main driving force of their life. Yeah. And that's definitely, from our conversations, been the same for you.
100%.
And that's the same for me, right? So at the stage where you went to sports science at Loughborough, you were a triathlete
Yes.
at a pretty good level.
Yes.
But triathlon was, at that stage, one of these quite niche sports, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
So that was a Dave Scott era and all that, wasn't it? Those guys who were
Gosh,
racing,
yeah.
racing in the swimming trunks.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Speedos and big glasses and helmets that didn't fit.
Some great photographs. There was that epic battle in Kona, wasn't it, where the two of them crawled across the line together,
right.
where everybody that knew about triathlon knew that. But triathlon was then where kind of road cycling was probably 10 years before that.
Yeah.
Because it was like just local niche people that did. I mean, road cycling was like a working man's sport then, wasn't it? It was
Very
a 10-mile
much so.
time trial.
Very much so.
And the Yellow Pages advert with the boy wanting a bike with a saddle on it. Do you remember that?
I do.
That's our age.
Just.
Showing that.
Just.
Yeah, I can remember it well. So you were developing your endurance engine through triathlon. How was your swimming?
It was good. I think, probably the real foundation of my swimming came from Singapore. I was in the swimming club. We actually had a coach there that had just missed out on the Montreal Olympics. So, his background and pedigree and also just his coaching, I suppose, style and background kind of really, really gave me insight as to what it needed. I mean, I was never going to be a top swimmer, but I could hold my own basically, particularly in triathlon.
Yeah. And
So, yeah.
And when did you ride a bike? When did you start to ride a bike?
Look, I got my first bike when I was my first road bike when I was in Singapore. I mean, I had bikes all through my childhood, but I never trained, as you know, training. I just loved enjoying riding my bike and going and exploring. And then I bought a second-hand bike, actually. That reminds me. When I was doing my degree, I was like, I think I might give this triathlon lark a bit of a go. And a few people I knew cycled and they pointed me in the right direction. I bought a second-hand bike, Specialized Alley Epic, I think it
That's
was.
an alley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what got me started. And it wasn't really until I graduated, and this is the next part of the story, I went and joined the police.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit more triathlon there.
Why did you join the police?
Why? I didn't know what I wanted to do.
For a job?
Yeah, I suppose back then, sports science, there wasn't as many opportunities there are now. In my mind, you either went on and did a PhD and kind of went down the research route, or I think there was limited opportunities.
Yeah.
And you ended up probably working in a gym as a glorified cleaner. And
Yeah.
again, Sarah speak here, and neither of which I wanted to do. So I had a few friends in the police, and I was like, oh, that looks quite exciting. It's again, I didn't see it as something that was 9 to 5. It was pretty different. Everything was
so
different.
that was while you were in that. Then that was when you were in inverted commas discovered, weren't you? So that you need to recount that story, because this is what happens. Because I find from speaking to people like this is that the guys who, if you give them a story about how he was discovered by a mentor, by somebody who then pushed him in the right direction, or pushed him in the direction he's now in, I guess the same thing can happen to me. And then, but to you, and you've told me this story before, but if you tell it to the microphone, what happened?
Tell it to the microphone. Well, it was the start of being discovered, is probably how I'd phrase it. There was a little bit of a blip before being discovered, and I think it was a combination of I was in full-time work, doing full-time shift work. I was training myself. I didn't have a coach. I was battering myself, being brutally honest with you, and I didn't have enough recovery. I ended up with overtraining syndrome, or chronic fatigue, for want of a better word. It took quite a while, I suppose, in some ways, to have it sort of diagnosed and something named. Oh, this is what I was I suppose experiencing. And at the same time, I was questioning the long-termism of staying in the police.
Yeah.
So I made the decision to finish at the police, took a career break, and I ended up going back to university to do a master's in sports science. Yeah. But at the same time, I'd literally just been diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and for want of a better word, I was absolutely empty. So for a year during my master's, all I could do was focus on my study. I didn't train at all. And it was probably at the back end of 10 months or so. I was really fortunate to kind of get hooked up to a doctor who worked for British Triathlon at the time, who then sort of referred me on to someone or a doctor in the space of chronic fatigue that helped me come back and go through sort of a rehabilitation, return to sport, protocol program to get me back on a bike. And the bike was part of my rehab. So I started off every second day on a turbo trainer, no more than 10 minutes, at 120 beats per minute. I can remember having this conversation with him going, why bother? Why bother getting changed, sort of thing? And I was like, Sarah, do you want to start somewhere? So that's where we started. And, fast forward, I very quickly built up, training volume, load, etc. And I knew that I probably wasn't going to go back to triathlon. The sport of triathlon had changed. It become more of a foot race. I could run, but not fast enough, being brutal.
You have to be able to do a sub 30 10K.
Correct. And that wasn't me. Yeah. I could be competitive, but I was never going to be, top of the world again. So another good friend of mine said, why don't you ever go at road racing? Because it's always my strongest discipline. And I was like, yeah, all right then. And I literally entered a few national series races in this country. Won one and got second. Unbeknown to me, someone had almost, I suppose, talent spotted me. And I got a phone call probably about a week later from British Cycling saying, we'd like you to come up. And,
love this. This is awesome.
we'd like you to come up, and we want to do a rig test or a cycle to exhaustion, basically. I was like, okay. So I was writing up my dissertation at that point, trekked myself up to Manchester, did this cycle to exhaustion.
This is when? Late 90s?
Yeah, late 90s, 97.
Yeah.
1997. Did it, kind of came away, none the wiser. If I'm being brutally honest with you, they didn't really give me any feedback, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent. A week later, I got another phone call saying, we'd like to select you for the 1998 Commonwealth Games. And I can still remember that conversation.
I'm still sure that's going to happen to me.
I'm sure it is, Colin. Never give up that dream.
Where was the 1998 Games?
Kuala Lumpur.
Off.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how it happened. It literally happened like that. Would it happen again like that nowadays? Probably not. But look,
so you went from 98 in Kuala Lumpur, you went to Sydney for GB.
Yep.
Right? So you went for England and Kuala Lumpur. So unbeknownst to you, as we get to the other end of the story, your first Commonwealth Games was in 1998.
Yes.
And then you've been involved recently with the game. Were you involved with the games recently with cycling? Only from an ambassador point of view.
Yeah, from ambassadorial review.
But so you went from 1998, and we'll talk about Gold Coast as we get to the other side of things. So you've got a long history with the Commonwealth Games,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you went to Sydney in 2000. That's just extraordinary, right? So you became a full-blown Olympic athlete in 2000, and you also went to Athens in 04.
Yeah.
And so this is when British cycling, this is when it started to happen.
Mm.
You know, Athens was a big watershed, wasn't it? That was when like Chris Hoy won the kilo and all that, wasn't
That's
it?
right.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And you're in the midst of all of this in the village with these people, and you're right in the rebirth of British cycling, or in the birth of
Your birth off, I would say.
of what was happening there. And then, and you also went to Worlds as well.
Yeah,
on the track.
Multiple world championships.
So you were on the road both Olympics?
Yeah, rode both Olympics. I tried to transition over to track in between Sydney and Athens, but to cut a long story short, I ended up with a prolapsed disc. My times were coming down. I picked up this injury, and it was probably about 12 months out from Athens. And I knew that by the time I kind of, worked on my back, etc., I probably wasn't going to be able to get into the fold of the times needed for individual pursuit. So I reverted back to road. I mean, I would have wanted to have doubled up, but I knew that I could get a place in the road team. So unfortunately, I had to give up the dream of the track.
Okay. Which is a story of an athlete, though, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, always on the edge of injury. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you effectively you 04.
I retired the first time in life.
Yeah. You retired from that side. You transitioned to another part of life in 04.
Yeah.
Hi guys, if you're interested in starting out in your implant career and are looking for a place to start to give you a fabulous grounding in the straightforward aspects of implant dentistry to move you along into a life of really satisfying and fulfilling implant dentistry, then why not think about exploring the Campbell Academy Year 1 implant course, which starts in January 2023. And so, after 04, what happened?
I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
You always think you might, but look, I could have probably gone on physically, but mentally I was just ready to. I'd had a brilliant 6 years living the life and dream of a full-time athlete. I explored a few opportunities in the sports world, and I went through a few interviews, got offered a few jobs, but at the time I was like, this doesn't feel right. I needed a break from the sporting environment. So I won't kind of give the whole story away, but I ended up getting my next job via eBay. And
in the mid-noughties as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I basically met someone through eBay who, it sounds a bit of a weird story, and I really won't digress too much, but basically it led to a job opportunity working down in the city for Zurich Global Insurance, working with FTSE 100 companies. I did not know what I was doing, but look, this guy, he basically opened some doors for me, offered me an opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands.
I want to go back for a step though, just for a minute. So you might not answer this question, you might bounce this one, which is totally fine, by the way, okay?
Yeah.
So I often go back to this thing about that Lance Armstrong said. So we are allowed to talk about him now because the pain's worn off a little bit. But that all endurance athletes are running away from something.
Yeah.
So what were you running away from?
Oh, gosh. What was I running away from? Normality.
Yeah? The fear of Terry and June?
No, I just kind of recognise, I'm quite happy to talk about it. I just don't want to settle for routine. I like variety. I don't like knowing what's going to happen the next hour, tomorrow, the next week. And in some ways, that probably explains a little bit of what and why I've done what I've done over my life.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Because I'm the low-level endurance athlete, but I keep doing these things. I hurt myself, and my wife will say, I don't understand why you do that. Like we were talking about there, and I was saying we don't have to understand it, you sort of support it.
Yeah.
You know? And I got an idea of what I'm running away from, but I'm not telling you because it's nobody's business. But so when somebody interviews me, I'll tell them. But okay, I just was interested to see if you could identify what that was, because you still do things, even a couple of weeks ago, which are quite frankly fucking ridiculous. Like 135 miles in a day, 2 or 3 days of riding, and most of it on track, and that's just crazy. What are you playing at, right? So, so there's still the urge to push yourself to it. past the point of no return, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've worked in the city. It's 04/05, and you're in the city, and you're about to go stratospheric to Canary Wharf and be an MD of a CEO, right? And so then all of a sudden you change again.
Yeah, I think probably after about 18, 24 months, I don't know, I just kept on looking over the fence of what was happening in the sporting world. It's a bit like a drug, isn't it? I think once you've kind of experienced it, competed at the highest level you possibly can. I just spotted an opportunity in UK sport, who's the funding quango in this country. And I was like, oh, that looks quite interesting. It was a performance advisor role. It was basically an account manager. And that's what I was doing in the insurance world. And it was similar, but in a sporting context. You're working with a portfolio of sports, working with CEOs, performance directors, and in some ways there was a massive injection of funding into the system, something like 350 million, which was, I suppose, starting off little sports in the view of qualifying for London 2012. And that's the bit where I learnt the most. So it ranged from working with the larger sports to actually starting up companies, for want of a better word. You're writing their strategies, their performance plans, recruiting their first head coach, identifying their first set of athletes, relocating their staff and athletes to a centre, wrapping around sports science services, and then kind of helping support them qualify for the London Olympics.
And so when we met, you were preparing to performance, manage to performance support archery in London. Yeah. So that was your first big performance director gig.
Yeah.
To be part of London 2012 must have been just amazing.
Oh, it was. I mean, I think it was the first time I felt proud to be British. You know, I genuinely do.
Maybe me too.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was. I mean, the atmosphere and the way they delivered the games. And
unbelievable.
Yeah, I still pinch myself. That was part of it.
So that's when I knew you up to that point, and then we kind of parted ways for a while. But then all of a sudden you were, you came out of archery. So before we get to netball, you've archery, boxing, you were BMX,
Skateboarding.
Yeah. Anything else before that?
No.
Netball, right? So one of the things, it must go down as one of your greatest achievements, the netball thing, right? So to take the England netball team to the Gold Coast, which was in 16?
18.
18 it was, right?
Yeah.
So to be the performance director that took them to the Gold Coast, and for the first time they ever won the gold medal, to beat Australia in the final, and all the manner in which that happened.
Yeah.
And that was big news. That did a massive amount for netball, a huge amount for the Roses, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It transitioned the sport in terms of profile, partnership opportunities, to increase in membership. You know, it was tenfold.
Yeah. So that in itself is just to have achieved that is enough to have achieved, and an extraordinary thing. And so that then moved you on to another chapter, which I was just reading some of the back clippings about, because you were into that. You went into athletics, didn't you?
Yeah.
With your co-conspirator from netball.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that ended after about 13 months.
Yeah.
In a flurry of horrible press stuff.
Yeah.
Which misrepresented the situation quite a large way, didn't it?
Yeah.
But it's probably best we don't talk about that, unless we get sued by UK Athletics.
Possibly.
Because I've spoken to you about that, obviously. And so what I read in the paper does not in any way represent the person that I understand who slept on a mattress outside the players' dorm in the Gold Coast so that they could have a bed.
Yeah.
So this business about somebody who's an aloof performance director who doesn't get involved with their athletes was ludicrous, clearly, because you are so into the athletes and into the athletes' welfare, and have always been like that. But that's clearly somebody else writing something to cover up something else.
Yeah, look, everyone's got entitled to their opinion.
But it worked out well.
Oh, it did. I mean, look, I don't regret that juncture in my career. I learnt lots, but I also learnt that if you don't enjoy something, change it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what I did.
I wish I'd been in that board meeting. But
I wasn't there to the end, but I know the real story.
Well, that's what I read into it.
Yeah.
But because before that, I know that you had been interested in going back to cycling, because that was kind of like that would like complete the circle to a degree, and so you could go to that end of cycling, so become from an athlete that was in there into being a performance director. And so now your role is now Director of Olympic and Paralympic performance for British cycling.
Yep.
So that's an extraordinary level role, yeah?
Yeah.
And so you're tasked with achieving this ridiculous targeted medal goal in Paris, because that's really how your success will be judged, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately, that's what you sign up to with UK sport. You know, you set targets on a yearly basis, but ultimately, you know, what are you going to deliver at the end in the Olympics and Paralympics?
So you have BMX and road cycling and track cycling and mountain biking.
Yep.
All wrapped into that. Yeah.
7 disciplines.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have to try and help that with that bunch of cats.
Yeah.
Get them towards
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's a big operation. And every single discipline's got its own little culture. There's all sorts of manner of human dynamics playing out in that space. And then you've got the whole innovation piece as well, around technology, equipment, to try and deliver against for certain categories at certain points.
And so it never gets easier, does it?
No.
And so on the wall out here where the bikes hang up is that Greg LeMond quote about it doesn't get easier, you just get faster. Right? And that's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're right.
So what is, because Nancy's going to tell me that we're running out of time. It's an extraordinary story, right? And the reason I would never ask anybody to sit opposite here that didn't completely inspire me, right? And so if we don't have a guest, then we don't do one, because I'm not just going to put people in for any reason. But I have an idea from the limited amount of knowledge that I have about your backstory, about things that were the most challenging junctures in this journey. What would you say has been the most challenging thing to deal with?
It's been a couple of things. I think, look, every time you do something for the first time, it kind of takes you out of your comfort zone. So when you have to move people along, as an example, from a performance management perspective, in netball, we had a player mutiny at one point, early doors, in terms of them not wanting to do what we set out and what we needed to do to be able to deliver against success. There's been loads, but those are probably the 2 biggest things that stick out.
Because when you entered, and this is another question you may not answer, when you first walked into the job of British Cycling, you had an issue to deal with. Yeah. And so the most difficult parts of leadership are when whatever route you take, you're going to really piss off somebody.
Yep.
Right? And deciding what is the right thing to do in your eyes. And you get to decide that because you're in a role. Because everybody thinks there's always a right or a wrong, isn't there? But you had to deal with the issue of transgender sport and your policy towards that, didn't you? In a world where governing bodies were some were starting to take a line on that and others were not.
Yeah.
And you had that fell on your desk, didn't it?
It wasn't necessarily, it was on the performance director's desk, but my kind of role and part in it was I was asked by ex-Olympic cyclists whether I would want to sign up to a letter that went to the UCI, which is the International Federation. And I had to walk a delicate line. I was an employee of British Cycling. They had their own policy in place. The UCI had their own policy in place. But I felt, and I still feel quite strongly on the subject, and I felt I wanted to do it as an individual. So I kind of made a decision to sign up to that letter that was submitted to UCI.
Because you have to be able to go to bed at night and sleep and know that you've done what you believe is right, don't you? And that's where leadership becomes really difficult, isn't it? Because ultimately you have to, there are decisions you have to do and conversations you have to have and stands you have to take, which are really uncomfortable and make you uncomfortable, but you have to have your values in place.
Yeah, and I think you grow, as you get older, probably, you start to really form stronger opinions about certain things. And this is one of the areas one of the subjects that I felt pretty strongly about. And
also for you, it's all right, isn't it? Because you've got such a brilliant pathway through your career that if something goes wrong there, well, fuck it, you'll just do something else.
Yep.
Kanye West had I like this little thing. There's a concept that he has, which it doesn't necessarily relate to money, but it relates to money for him, and so he calls it fuck you cash. So he has a load of fuck you cash. So he can just go, he can do what he likes because they've got all this money in the bank. But when you detach yourself from needing ludicrous amounts of money, you're always going to be all right for your next meal. And I think that allows you, it makes it somewhat easier to make the difficult decisions because you can do them without worrying about how you're going to feed yourself tomorrow. Yeah. And I think that's a type of fuck you cash, which is really useful.
I like that.
You can have it. But Kanye might come after you, but he'll probably be president of the United States before then he'll be distracted. So last thing, okay? And it's a question that we ask everybody at the end of the podcast, all right? So your story is inspirational, and you're going to speak to some guys who did practice. You're also coming back talking about a business course, and I'm so grateful that you come, right? And if nobody turns up and I'm the only one listening, I'm delighted with that because it's inspired me to be better at various aspects of what I do. But if you now, sitting here with all the knowledge and wisdom that you now have from the experiences you have, if you had the opportunity to sit across the table and talk to your 21-year-old self, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them?
Gosh, there was 3 things that went through my mind then.
You
I'm
can
not-
have all 3.
Can I?
Mhm.
Okay. Don't look back. Always look forward. Don't have any regrets, and keep it simple.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Not at all. Pleasure.
Blimey. So I knew some of those stories, but not all of those stories. And it's such a pleasure to speak to someone who's so inspirational but so humble. But also, Sarah was so honest with us about some of the ups and downs that she's had through her career. And I really hope that you're able to take that as some part of little inspiration into your day or into your week, and just learn a little bit to make you feel a little bit better, because I know that I will. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and we'll see you next time.